So badging something I was already a little bit familiar with when I started the course because last year when I was putting together my own kind of learning management system, engagement management system, badges and achievements were one of the things that I wanted to include. So the first panel here is one of my A-level class notebooks, and within there in the tutorial, these are all the different achievements that the students can achieve between now and Christmas. So zooming in on those a little bit, one of the things that I noticed is missing from quite a bit of the literature is about the kind of actual design of the badges themselves. So I took quite a few lessons from how video games tend to design their badges, and taking a look at those, the top row have one particular style, the bottom two rows have a different style, and then the bottom rows again are divided by colour. So straight away the students can see the top row are things that can be achieved at any time, whereas the bottom ones are attached to a specific topic and then color coded kind of within that topic. So a different style and a different color system seems to help map a student's journey through the course and makes these things very, very distinct. And again, to take another lesson from video game design and the way that they use their achievement system, which I think translates quite well to accreditations and badges, is the idea that I can use these badges, I can use these credits to kind of instill behaviors that I want from my students. So some of these are about achieving a particular percentage in a test or responding to all of their feedback, and some of them are just getting the work handed in on time consistently, for being above the class average, for showing consistent improvement week by week. So it's not just who can do the best in the class, but there's a range of behaviors that I suppose I'm trying to reinforce by distributing these. Now, one of the benefits that I found for my own teaching was that I can look at a glance at a student's achievements, and actually that tells me an awful lot more than my mark book used to. Instead of having to wade through numbers and figures and averages, I can take this student, for instance, who I've anonymized, and I can see straight away, just looking at the achievements, because of the design of them, that this is a student who has submitted all of his homework on time and really consistently, and he's shown some improvement. However, his test scores haven't been great. The quality of his homework is never at the top of the class that he's in. So while he's consistent with his work, the quality of his work is going to need to improve. So when it comes to feedback to the student and it comes to writing reports, I found this really quite valuable. And I can compare that to a different student, say this one for instance, and straight away I can see a much different story. I can see that actually while the work is submitted on time, the quality of the work and the fact that in all these interim tests and things, this student's getting above 70% shows that the quality of the homework and the additional work that's being done is a lot better, and that's translating quite well to his tests. So again, I found it really, really beneficial when it comes to reports, when it comes to feedback, when it comes to areas to improve, which I think stands in separation to a lot of the online badging schemes that I've seen, where there's a lot of learning and there's a lot of students submitting their work, but actual intentional kind of individual feedback seems to be lacking. Whereas actually I'm finding that by giving badges, it's quite straightforward. So in designing the system and trying to implement it, I took a lot of lessons from Steam, which is, if you don't know, a game store slash game library slash it's got a place for you to host your achievements and have a profile. It's got a social scene as well. So it's very much everything to do with gaming all wrapped up in one. So this is my homepage, and straight away you can see that I've got badges, I've got achievements, I can show off the achievements that I'm proud of, and I can say these are things that I've worked quite hard at and collected. And when people visit my page or they go to add me as a friend or we go to talk, they are displayed quite openly, which again I think is a problem with badging at the moment. Video games seem to have got it right, but the more I look online, the more I see that actually a lot of badges are very hidden away, which I guess has its advantages if you're using it as a CV. But in this day and age as well, I think people want to be able to show off what they've achieved and they want to be able to host it somewhere, be it a social media site, be it LinkedIn. I think visibility adds value for people in this day and age, whereas perhaps in generations past, you wouldn't necessarily want to advertise every qualification, every certificate that you had. And interestingly, one of the things that Steam does is to introduce you to their operating system and to show what they can do and to show that you can add friends and socialize and comment and review and all these different ways to get involved. They have their own badge system, which has existed for quite a long time actually. I don't know if it predates Mozilla's open badge scheme, but it's something that's being used in video games and by video game designers already. So I think there's It's not going to show up much in the educational literature from what I've seen, but I definitely think there's lessons that can be taken here, either from a design or an implementation perspective, because this is something that people will use really robustly. Just having a look at my progress there, I've done 26 out of 28 of those things to get myself familiar. And instead of being a tutorial that I have to jump through, I can go at my own pace, I can see my own progress, it can be shown off to other people, I can see what's still outstanding, I'm rewarded for it as well. Everything ties in quite nicely, and it's quite well supported, and I'm quite encouraged to go ahead and do that. So one of the things that I wanted to do when I was taking a look at the Arn et al. Paper was try and compare my own system to some of the other badge systems that exist, and to the table that they put together of how badges being used as credentials or as motivators or as pedagogical tools, how that stands up in an area of open access, open accreditation, and all the rest of it. And one of the things that I think is missing from a lot of open badge schemes is any sense of kind of a way to progress from one badge to the next, a specific learning route, some sort of scheme whereby you can go through them. And actually, this has existed again in a video game setting for a really long time, because you have systems called skill trees where one achievement will then open and branch out into 2, 3, 4 connected ones which have their own connections. That's the sort of thing that I think when I come around to redrafting and doing my second iteration, I'm going to try and implement with my own achievement system, so it's less disparate single achievements and it's more an ongoing story from one to the next, showing the connections between them. And interestingly, one of the things that I remembered while I was making this, while skill trees and these kind of badges and achievements come in a range of forms, a game called Final Fantasy XII, which is probably about 15 plus years old now, did this years and years and years ago, but really quite well actually, because instead of the traditional skill tree, they had what they called a license board, and when you look at it, it looks eerily similar to kind of a cross between a skill tree and a badge collection, an open accreditation system. So this is something that's existed, and yet not shown up in the literature for decades nearly. Which I found quite impressive. Video game designers seem to be onto something here, and these sorts of systems definitely work in the way of extrinsic motivation, and giving a sense of motivation and a sense of achievement at the end, and a sense of having qualified for something. So I do think that we should be taking more lessons from them. So in closing, to summarize, my first foray into actually implementing a badge system, I found straight away some pros and definitely some cons as well. So to go back to the Arn et al. Table, I feel its use as a pedagogical tool is what's lacking for me at the moment, a way to structure a route through the qualification that I'm kind of training the students for, and showing the different connections between the different subjects, and why experience of one will then lead to experience in another and a third and a fourth. That I think is missing at the moment, and that is a narrative that I think I need to build in. Their use as a motivator, however, has really, really been taken up actually, and I think to some extent, partially students like a sense of achievement. These are all hosted publicly as well, so in the public area of the OneNote, any student can see what any other student has achieved, which has worked really, really well, because if they were hidden away and they were private, there wouldn't be that sense of competition, that sense of achievement, that sense of, this is what I've got and I can show it off. And because no one else can make them, in a sense, I suppose, closed education. I've made it so that only I can make and distribute these. It adds to them a bit of weight and a bit of value. Unfortunately, I'm the only person at my school currently doing this, but I do wonder how readily we could roll something like this out across the entire school and have badges and certificates and achievements for all sorts of different subjects, and then see where the overlap is and see if we can actually build a narrative between the subjects and show that skills in one definitely apply and have value in other places as well. I know that's one thing we're looking at with our younger years and our curriculum review, because take, for instance, unit conversions. It's taught in maths, it's taught in physics, it's covered in chemistry to some extent, it's covered in biology for microscopy. That's something that might be taught 2, 3, 4, 5 times. But if we knew that a student had been taught it in one place and they had been accredited for it, straight away we'd have a lot more information about that student, and we could change our expectations and guide them through the next step, as opposed to repeating ourselves. So I think from that point of view, there would be a lot of value in it. Sadly, I still think at the moment it's not quite taken up by employers and universities and third parties as much as it could be. But to some extent, I think that's also kind of the fault of the schools because we haven't adopted it and we haven't introduced it. So a lot of people don't know enough about it. We're still very stringent on GCSEs and A levels and preparation for university in the most traditional sense. So I think it'd be interesting to see what we can do with it, and it's something I'm definitely going to be playing around with, especially hopefully as I move into the course design module next semester.